What's a green flag you've experienced on a first date that made you want to have a second date? Story 1. He took me to an amateur stand-up comedy night. He was heartily laughing at all the jokes, and they were so bad, so not funny at all. I was planning to not go on another date with him because he obviously has a bad sense of humor. As we were walking to the car, he commented how bad everyone was, but he just wanted to encourage them, so he laughed at everyone's jokes. We've been married for 12 years now. Story 2. I met my current boyfriend on Tinder, and I had basically little to no expectations that this would go anywhere because, well, it's Tinder. We ended up chatting on the app before he gave me his phone number, and he ended up asking me if I wanted to hang out the next day. I said sure. We live in Finland, 10 minutes away from the Swedish border, so we drove over to the Swedish side. He said he needed to get some groceries, alcohol, and gas for the car, so we did that before driving back over to the Finnish side. He dropped me back off at my place and said he really hoped he could see me again. Well, fast forward to later that night, he called me and asked if I wanted to see him again because he really enjoyed my company and wanted to keep hanging out. He apologized for the less than exciting grocery/gas/alcohol run date earlier, but I said I didn't mind. I said I had a good time and that I wanted to see him again too. We ended up driving to his cabin in the evening and it was just so romantic. It was freezing cold, as it usually is in Finnish Lapland in winter, so we just cuddled and talked all night. I really love him so much, and I have a sneaking suspicion he's going to propose soon. Story 3. I had gone on a lot of first dates, and all of them felt forced or awkward. I finally met this one girl online, and we met up at a breakfast place. I was so nervous, especially since I felt like this girl was way out of my league. We met and sat down and started to talk. She was asking so many questions and was so engaged in the conversation that I was actually taken aback because I was just used to being the one to ask all the questions. That was my green flag, so I had already decided to ask her out again at that point. We laughed and shared a few deep stories. Once we were getting ready to leave, she mentioned that she lifts weights, and we started a little conversation from that. She asked me if I wanted to go see her lifting belt, so we went to her car and she showed me all of her gear and was smiling so big the entire time. Right as I was about to ask her out on a second date, she beat me to it and asked if I wanted to go out on a second date. The relationship unfortunately didn't last, but she was a rare kind of woman for sure. Story 4. Not the first date, but the moment I knew I was going to marry this man. We went grocery shopping. It was about 9 p.m. and we had just both been paid. The young lady in line in front of us had a very young baby and was paying with WIC, Women, Infant, and Children coupons, and a food stamp card. Her total came to be about $22 and she was holding a $20 bill. She looked dejected and put back the one and only thing that was probably her splurge, a candy bar and an energy drink. Other than that, she had baby food, diapers, chicken, rice, bananas, formula, wipes, the bare minimum. I turned around to tell my now husband to hand me my wallet. I didn't have to. He already had his out, took out a $50 bill, handed it to her, and told her to keep the change. He changed her week. He changed my life. That was the moment I knew he was it for me. Story 5. He made it clear it was a date and that he was interested without it ever feeling creepy or like he was pressuring me for anything. We talked for hours, went from restaurant to walking up and down the river to my place for a beer. Then I offered for him to stay over, but on a mattress on the floor. I was in a studio with no couch, not in my bed, and he wasn't pushy about anything more happening. The first few weeks, he was always sweet and respectful, but made it so clear that he was interested in a relationship. No back and forth or second guessing. And now we're married. Story 6. Pretty cool story. First date with my now wife, had plans to go to a fancy Italian restaurant. I show up a bit early, dressed as nicely as my wardrobe allows, couple of drinks before she gets there. But anyway, she arrives and we enjoy dinner, drinks, appetizers, and dessert. The works. Anyway, when it's time for the check, the waitress comes over and says, "A person who prefers to remain anonymous picked up y'all's tab and told me to tell y'all to continue to enjoy the night." We were both pretty shocked. I wasn't keeping tabs, but this was an expensive meal we just had. I tipped well, of course, and I thought to myself, the only reason anyone would do that is they say an obvious first date unfolding and thought we were a cute/happy/genuine or something couple. We both felt pretty special. Been married for 3 years now, together for 8. We eventually paid it forward to another young couple years later. Story 7. Maybe didn't end as happily as most of these, as in I didn't end up marrying the guy. But back in high school, a friend of mine got stood up on a date and asked me if I could just come down to the restaurant because he felt embarrassed and felt awkward leaving. The staff had felt incredibly bad about it and kept trying to reassure him the date would come. So I said, sure, why not? I had nothing better to do on a Sunday night. So I dressed nice and went down there, told the hostess that I was so sorry, but I was running late for my date, and oh, there he is, and sat down with him. It was this little fancy pizza joint, and we actually had a blast trying to fool the staff into thinking I was actually his date. He offered to pay, but I kept insisting. When the waitress came back with the machine, he took my card from me and paid with his own instead, so I wouldn't. It was fun, and I got to know him better as a friend. Felt natural, too. He ended up walking me home even though I lived further than him. He lived down the street from the place. He got a call from his real date on the way home, and he just hung up on her. Gave me a hug goodbye and waited until I was inside the house before he left. He later told me his date was calling to tell him she wasn't actually interested in him at all, and she just said yes to the date because she felt bad. He showed me the texts. I let him know I actually had a lot of fun with him and suggest we hang out more. He started being awkward with me for a couple of days and then let it slip that going on that date with me made him realize he had some feelings for me and wanted to go on another one. I just said, thank God you said something because I didn't know how to say it. The green flag was just the fun that we had and how it didn't feel forced, I guess. It was just fun and he actually listened to me, asked questions and wanted to get to know me better. And it wasn't awkward at all. It felt like a real date even though it was kind of impromptu. We did end up going on another date, just a walk in the park, and we held hands. I kissed him on the cheek. Never actually made things official because he had this rule about 3 dates before that. But we ended up just staying friends after the third date. We realized our friendship was something we didn't want to ruin by becoming a couple. We remained good friends until we graduated, but lost touch when he moved to a different city. Still see him from time to time when he comes in to visit family, and we always joke about those dates. He's got a lovely fiancé now, and I'm incredibly happy for him. Story 8. We went to a fairly fancy place, and I have the palate of a 5-year-old. I can typically find something anywhere, but I was going through the menu and there was basically nothing I can remotely make edible for me. But they have mac and cheese, we're in our early 30s, and we're at a fancy place. There's no way I can order mac and cheese and not look like a toddler. So the waiter comes around and I'm basically having a panic attack in my head, so I let her order first. She orders the mac and cheese. Oh my God, I ordered the mac and cheese too. We go and see a live jazz show. We're leaving and it snowed while we were in the show. I don't remember how it came up, but I made some joke about doing donuts in the parking lot, and to my extreme surprise, she said something along the lines of, hell yeah, I've never done donuts in a parking lot. I put the Forester through its paces, turned the traction control off, and got the side windows coated in snow. She was laughing like a schoolgirl the entire time. We hung out a few more times and parted ways as friends instead. There was a significant class difference. She was staying in her parents' multi-million-dollar home on the ocean, and my parents will probably die destitute. Story 9. Not a first date, but about maybe 2 weeks into seeing each other. He saw a friend of mine for the first time that night, and we had fun. However, I began crying in front of him and my friend because someone I used to date messaged me telling me he doesn't need me anymore and that me setting him up with someone proves he can easily move on from me and that I'm nothing but the past and I don't mean anything. This guy I barely knew at the time sat me down, gave me some blankets, and told me I'm not going to entertain or host anything until he knows I feel better. He then tried making me some hot cocoa but couldn't figure out the Keurig, so I laughed and cried as I showed him how to do it. My friend told him it was the nicest thing anyone ever did for me, and he was deeply confused because this is the bare minimum for someone to do. What are you talking about? And we're engaged now 8 years later. Story 10. I realized I spent most of the day talking about myself, hear me out, and I've never once had that happen. I'm a very reserved and private person when I first meet someone, which has honestly made dating difficult for years. But this guy, he had such a way of asking questions and keeping the conversation going and encouraging me to share my thoughts and opinions. He also shared his to everything I said that when our date was done, I realized I spent almost the entire day talking, which is so unlike me for first dates. I wasn't afraid of him judging me or not liking my response to something. All of his questions were sincere and he seemed to genuinely care about whatever the hell was about to come out of my mouth. I didn't have to think about what to say, it just came out of me and he met me wherever I was at. Maybe it sounds silly, but it was pretty magical, and we still see each other. Story 11. We're coworkers, and we started flirting after a while of friendship. I dressed casually for a date, like a white dress shirt, blue jeans, and my date shoes. She showed up all dressed up and couldn't walk in her heels. She ended up falling over and scraping her knee. I helped her up and got my extra pair of shoes I keep in the car and some socks for her, put them on for her, and bandaged her knee up from my first aid kit. Dinner was great too. We bounced off of each other. When it was over and we split the bill, she was pretty insistent on it, and I was going to pay for it since I asked for the date. I walked her to her car and she kissed me on the cheek. I asked for the second date right then and there, and we've been together for a year and a half. Her family loves me, especially because her mother loves my cooking. And my family gushes over her. I really think we'll go somewhere, and if we do, I couldn't ask for a better partner. Story 12. I was late because my bike broke down, and when I got to the club, she was surrounded by a bunch of guys chatting her up. I was oblivious to that, just all stressed and covered in oil and dirt from getting that fucking beast working again. I walked up to her and said something like, "Hey, want to get out of here and go eat?" And she just smiled, got up, and left with me. Okay, so on the second date, we're meeting up at a restaurant. I was checking my bike over before leaving to make sure it wouldn't break down again when two buds of mine on the block came up and asked me what was up. We all worked on each other's bikes. I mentioned I had a date and didn't want the bike to f up again. It was like a mix of a Harley and Yamaha parts we cobbled together. And I casually commented the clutch seemed jinky but workable, so I was going to grab my stuff from my apartment and take off, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll take a look and make sure it's good while you do that." I came back and they've disassembled the whole f***ing clutch assembly. I'm freaking out like, "What the hell, man?" And they're giving me this gormless look of, "Oh, can't have a jinky clutch, so we figured we'd fix all of it." And the short version is I showed up half an hour late to the restaurant. She's at the bar and some guy is chatting her up. I sit down next to her and apologize for being late because of my idiot mates. And we have a drink. The guy keeps trying to be part of the conversation, and she's responding, and I get a bit pissed, but I keep my cool over it. We get our table, and she casually mentions the guy wanted her to go with her to another place if I didn't show up soon, and I'm like, looking for where he is because I'm pissed and want to do something stupid. She just laughs and says it's cute. I got jealous, but she wasn't going to go with him. She was just giving me shit for being late again. Anyway, we eventually got married, and it's been like 30 years. Story 13. Okay, so this is a little persnickety, but I hate the sound of people eating. It's just this weird thing. So going to a movie and then someone sits behind me with a large tub of popcorn and starts chomping away, it's almost unbearable. I know, picky. I'd been on lots of dates where we'd sit down, then someone sits down behind us, mega tub of popcorn in hand, and then chomp, slurpity slurp their mega drinks, and I would turn to my date and ask timidly if maybe we could move. The responses would vary from why to once and kind of hilarious in retrospect to sure, go ahead, I'm staying here, to the point where I just stopped asking, would suffer in silence. So I go on a date with this one guy. We sit down, big popcorn eater with tub sits right behind us and starts going to town. It's pretty bad. So I very tentatively look over at my date, and only to see that he's very tentatively looking over at me with the same exact look on his face. Without a word, we both got up and moved. We've been married for 44 years now. And that's even when we went on our second date, where he turned happily to me saying, "Okay, I paid for the first movie, now it's your turn." What? You said you're a feminist. What? OMG, we still make each other laugh and we can still just sit and talk to each other for hours. In fact, we just got back from a trip to Paris where every day we would just stroll around, then find a cafe, then sit and chat for an hour or so, then walk some more, then lunch, maybe a museum for a bit, then cafe and chat. It was just wonderful. And we still hate the sound of people chomping their food. Story 14. It was my first time going into the city by myself. I'd seen a Facebook post online for an event with alternative music, emo, punk rock, and thought, what the hell, I'll check it out. I knew no one there, the event went late into the night, and I'd only just moved here from living in a country town all my life. I didn't even know how I was supposed to order a drink, had to ask the bartender, who thankfully wasn't judgmental and told me about tabs and some common drinks. I'd been wandering around for a bit, looking absolutely lost, when this guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, you look lonely." He brought me over to his friend group, and I ended up hanging out with them for quite a while. Unfortunately, I was also completely unaware of my own alcohol tolerance and ended up feeling very tired. I was falling asleep on this guy until the staff came over and told me I had to leave as they didn't want me passing out there. He came with me, offering to make sure I got onto the train safely, and it turned out we lived within 20 minutes walk of each other, so he came with me again. He walked me right up to the door, then walked home in the dark alone, messaging me the next day to make sure I was okay. Unfortunately, I didn't see how sweet he was at the time, but eventually we did get together and he stayed with me through so much crap in my life. We've been together for around 2.5 years now. Story 15. Two green flags from the same man. The first one, I thought he was going to be my first casual hookup. We were both high as kites when meeting, as you do at a music festival, and the next day, while I deadass called him a different name, he had already memorized my name and a difficult surname and was making plans to see me next weekend. Second flag, the first official date I had to change and reschedule as my mentally handicapped sister needed babysitting. I told him and he suggested coming over if I was okay. I thought, cool, trial by fire to see how he reacts to my sister. She is a great litmus test to see if people are decent or not. So he comes over, was a bit awkward, and then just totally bonded with her, took my cues, and learned how to speak to her and what she was comfortable with. We are now 8 years together, 5 years married, 3 cute pets, a new house in an awesome country, and trying for a baby. Life is good, and he's my everything. Still call him a different name occasionally, though, just for fun. Story 16. I have a son from my previous marriage, and at dinner I told him flat out my son will always be my first priority, and if he couldn't handle that, then there was no point wasting each other's time. That my son had a damn good dad, so I didn't want a dad for my son, but if we ever got serious enough for him to let him into my son's life, my expectations of him would be to be a positive influence, a mentor, and someone my son could count on to support him and love him. There would be times when I would be busy doing mom things like taking care of a sick kiddo, a babysitter canceled, or there's a game or school event I needed to be at, homework I needed to stay home and help with, etc. And if he couldn't understand and accept that, there was no place for him in my life. He just looked at me and said that's what a good mom does and it shouldn't be any other way. He told me later he knew at that moment on our first date I was the woman he was going to marry, and he vowed to make sure we never went without anything as long as he was in our lives. And here we are, almost 10 years later, married for almost 8. He loves my son as much as I do, and he would do anything in the world for us, and I don't doubt he would die for either one of us too. How I knew he was the one was when I was sicker than a dog. I literally couldn't get out of bed. We had only been casually dating for about 6 weeks, but he came over with pizza, chicken noodle soup, ginger ale, tea, honey, lemons, and some video games. He fed my son pizza and me soup, made me tea, held my hair while I projectile vomited all over my bathroom, cleaned up my mess, put me to bed, played video games with my son, got him to bed, got him up for school, made breakfast and lunch for him, dropped him off at school, and then called out of work to take care of me. He cleaned my house, did my dishes, did my laundry, changed the sheets on my bed while I took a shower, and stayed cuddled up on the couch with my sick ass all day, then met my son at the bus stop and made us dinner. My son looked at me and said, "Mommy, I like your friend. Can he stay here more?" I fell in love with him that day. The way he cared about my son and about me and how he jumped in to help with no expectations, just wanting to make sure I was taken care of and my son was safe and taken care of too. We got engaged a year later and married a year after that. My son is 16 now, and my husband is still his best friend. They love each other so much, and they're always together. He's at all my son's games, helps with homework, plays video games with him. He takes him fishing and camping, taught him how to drive. He treats my son like his own child, and the bond they have is incredible.